This morning, we have the opportunity to talk with Laurel about software compliance, the process for vendors to qualify for and maintain compliance. We anticipate this to be a conversation for you to be able to ask questions. You've got Laurel, our resident expert on compliance, and please, take this opportunity to ask your questions and better understand that process for software compliance. I noticed that we have several people on the call today as well that have a lot of experience here. So if you're able to add some insight to our newer users, that is always welcome as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Laurel, are you ready to take the screen and go ahead and jump right in?
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us for this training today. So I have some slides prepared, and I'm also going to jump out of the slides at a few places to show you some stuff on our website that's relevant to compliance testing. You have to bear with me as I make the transition from slideshow to web browser. Does anyone have any specific questions about compliance, anything that they're hoping I'll cover today? Okay. Well, if you think of anything as I move through this, just please speak up or drop a note in the chat section, and we'll get to it. So we're going to go ahead and start with the basics. So what does NEMSIS compliance mean? So I listed out here the complete definition that's listed in the documentation on our website. And this is a pretty large definition, maybe a little too much information for most people. So I'm going to go ahead and cover what compliance means in a nutshell. So software that has been tested by the NEMSIS TAC is tested that it conforms to the NEMSIS XML standard, meaning it follows the XML schema, the schematron schema, and is using standardized NEMSIS web services. Only software solutions that have been tested in this way are considered compliant and are permitted to contribute to the national EMS repository. So for states, that means the state software must be compliant, and for agencies, that means their agency software must be compliant. So many software vendors use these logos that we hand out as proof of their compliance. There's the blue one for state systems and the red one for agency systems. So then, overview of how the testing process works. So we have a few different testing processes. We have collect data, which is our agency systems, and receive and process, which is our state system. There are two testing phases, pre-testing and active testing. Both phases contain the same structure, 6 test cases, 1 demographic file for an agency that then has 5 ePCR records. Testing for both types of software collect and receive will include dynamic implementation of schematron and implementation of the NEMSIS XSDs. Now the way that's done is different for states than it is for agencies, but in both cases we look for the fact that files are being validated, and that only structurally correct files that follow the national business rules or the state's business rules are accepted by web services or exported by a product. So again, the ability to submit or receive via web service. There is no other way to send or receive NEMSIS files under the standard. It's all web service. And then again, XML schema and schematron schema validation at every juncture. So every time a file changes hands, the sending system and the receiving system should both be checking that the file meets the structural requirements for the XML schema and the business requirements for the schematron schemas, both locally at the state level and at the national level. So we don't test for the overall design of software, the user interface, how easy it is to use, how fast you can do the data entry, whether it's going to correct the errors for you automatically, if the software is 100% bug-free, if the custom schematron rules that are implemented collide with each other. So we don't We don't test your software to make sure it catches a space where you might have a state rule that collides with the national rule. That's a little out of our hands. And for bug testing, it's literally impossible for us to find every bug with a piece of software. And I'm sure all the software vendors on the call are well aware that there is no way to find every bug, no matter how many test cases we give you. So we do not test for these items. It's up to the users, it's up to the purchasers of these softwares to determine if the software meets their needs from an ease of use standpoint. So then I'm going to go through just a real quick sort of overview of what a type of software testing with us looks like. So I'm going to do the most common type, which is the agency software testing, the collect and spend system. It's really the most common type of testing that we do because there are more collect and send systems than there are state systems. So what this, this starts with an application on the NEMSIS website, and this is the same for all, for both receive and process and collect and send. So on the website, on the NEMSIS website, on this V3 compliance page, under general information, there's the application form. It's kind of hidden in this little block, but if you click through the application form, it's just a little short survey that you have to fill out in order to begin compliance testing. Contains pretty basic information that we need to know to list you on the website and a customer would need to have in order to purchase your product. So your name, your website, the name of the software, the version of your software that's being tested. This is very important for several states who want to make sure that as your software is versioned, that it continues to remain compliant with the NEMSIS standard. Platforms, so is it web-based, iPhones, that kind of stuff. Product capabilities, we allow vendors to select just one or both types of testing, and then contact information for the person who's going to be working with the TAC to complete the testing. This is really important because this person is going to end up getting an Active Directory account, a NEMSIS account, so that they can submit their test files later on in the process. So you fill out the forms, you hit submit, and then a few things are going to happen. So the first thing that happens is we're going to get started on creating your NEMSIS account so that you'll have some credentials to use to submit to the testing web services via SOAP. Then we're going to add you to the in progress table on the testing status page. I'm sure many of you know this table. It's at the very bottom of the page, and it just has a list of a company name and what time they started testing, as well as some little status check-in. After that, the vendor will receive an email from me, from Laurel, or someone else at the TAC with some basic testing instructions and some information about NEMSIS. So what this might include is instructions on where to find the pre-testing cases, instructions on when to schedule a call, instructions on how to join the Google group, or other items. It'll generally end with a statement directing the vendor to ask me if they have any questions about anything. That said, if you, a vendor, are not ready to start testing, but you have questions, you should definitely send us an email. Part of my job is to help vendors with any questions that they might have about any part of compliance testing, no matter if they're a year from compliant, ready to complete compliance tomorrow, or have been compliant for 5 years with us. So if you have any questions about the NEMSIS standard or what is considered compliant, don't even hesitate to reach out so we can answer those questions. So that begins the pre-testing stage of testing. The pre-testing stage is intended to be self-service for vendors. You can download a pre-testing package on the NEMSIS website, and it'll contain a lot of different files, but most importantly, some HTML and XML test cases. It's meant to be completed by the vendor on their own, and they check their own work. So for example, the way that would work is you would open up the HTML test cases, you enter the data into your software, and then you hit export and look at the XML files that your program created. Do they match the XML files that were included in the pre-test package? So by match, I mean if you put in, 9 a.m. on October 1st, 2019 for the unit notified by dispatch time. Is that what you see in the test case or in the XML export? So this step with the test cases themselves is meant to prepare you for the real XML test that will happen in active testing. When a vendor feels that they're done with pre-testing and they have sufficiently implemented the test cases, they have all of their validation systems working, including XML schema and schematron schema validation, when they believe that they can implement custom elements correctly, they should schedule a conference call with me where I will verify those requirements. This conference call is probably the most time that a vendor will have to spend talking to me to complete compliance. It usually takes about an hour, and I'll check the software for a number of items. I'm not going to check the content of the test cases against XML at this stage, but I will check things like, are all of the NEMSIS standard fields displayed in the software? So part of compliance is the full implementation of the standard. That means that there needs to be a place for the user to enter eother02, even if the user isn't going to need eother02 in their final implementation. Compliance software needs to implement the full standard so that it could be used in any agency and any state throughout the country for any selection of NEMSIS elements that they choose to implement. So during this call, I'm not going to check user friendliness or ease of use, but I will check to make sure all the elements are there as expected. I'll also check validation. The main part of this call is to check custom elements and validation. Generally, what that will look like is I'll send a schematron file with just a couple of rules in it over to the vendor and ask them to implement it in their product in real time. And then we'll check the schematron rules. Can we change some values and make the fatal rule fire? Can we change some values and make the warning rule fire? If the vendor software is able to successfully implement schematron, if we can verify on some level that XML schema is being validated against and that custom elements can be implemented and changed within the software, then the pre-testing call is over and the vendor will move on to active testing. So before I move on, I want to mention that on the compliance page, we do have a very, very detailed document that has a checklist for this call as well as every other part of compliance. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up real quickly. So again, on the compliance page, in the same general information space where you see application form, there's several documents that kind of give the justification for compliance testing. Right below that is the pre-testing package that I was talking about. So there's the zip file with all the pre-testing materials, all of the files and resources, state data sets, test files, custom element configurations, all of that fun stuff. And then right above that is the explanation document that has all of the steps in minute detail. So this document is 13 pages long, and it includes all types of testing, receive and process, collect and send, pre-testing and active testing. But to give a quick example, for the pre-testing step for collect data, there's a checklist that goes over every piece of information that you will need and everything you'll need to have implemented. And for each stage of testing, there's a checklist for what will need to be completed. So for the web conference, data entry user interface is checked to ensure all the elements are there. Web service submissions are checked. Demographic data set update is checked. Custom elements, schematron, and then ready for market. So this is maybe as close as we're going to get to checking ease of use, as we're going to determine if your software looks really unfinished. So since this is a little harder to quantify, the way I would explain this is I would only have a problem with the way a software looks if it was clearly maybe unusable by an end user. Like you needed to have some sort of very detailed coding knowledge to be able to use it. To date, I have never seen a piece of software that had a problem on this ready for market checkpoint. Okay, so back in the slideshow, that's the end of the pre-testing call. So when the software product passes off all the requirements in pre-testing, they move to the active testing phase. At this point, their status on the website is going to be updated to indicate that they finished pre-testing and the date that they finished, and they're going to receive a set of HTML test cases via email. This is going to be a new suite of test cases from the pre-test cases. And again, same structure, 1 demographic file and 5 EMS, ePCR files. And then I'm going to send them the URL for the CTA web app and the CTA endpoint. So the active testing is an automated process, and we use the CTA application that we built, which just stands for Compliance Testing Automation, which allows the user to receive some feedback on their test cases in real time. So no one has to wait for me to take their file and manually check it. This program will do that for you. So when you enter the cases in your software and submit them to the CTA endpoint, you can log into the web app to get that real-time feedback. When a vendor has submitted their test cases, checked them in the web app, and believes that their test cases are entirely complete and without errors, they can inform me or someone at the NEMSIS TAC, and then we can verify that for them. I'm going to go ahead and quickly show the CTA web app for anyone who may not have seen it before. So it looks kind of like this on the login screen. When you log in, you should only see your name. Here we can see some people who have who are working on recertification right now. So I'm going to go ahead and click into Zoll, and I won't show their files, but I'll show what it looks like to a vendor. So after you've submitted files, you'll see the test case you submitted, the date it was sent in, and whether it was successful or if there was a schematron or an XML warning. The comparison report is where you can view your XML payload and any differences between that file and our gold standard XML file that we expect. This is, again, a different type of report on the same sort of information. And then submission history is where you can see all the information for all your previous submissions for this test case. So generally, the way this will work for a vendor is when they have submitted all their files and everything says successful, they usually at that point will ask me to look at their files and verify that they passed. And then we can get into the nitty-gritty of your value for D-Agent CO2 doesn't match our value. Can you please check that with the test case and ensure that every bit of minutia in the test cases is represented in their submission. So once we've verified that your test cases are complete and they match what we expect, you're considered compliant for the version that you were tested on and for the version of your software that you tested with. Compliant vendors will receive a letter from the TAC that certifies they completed testing. You also receive a set of compliant logos to use. It looks a little bit like this. In 3.5, they'll have the new logo on them, as well as 3.5.0. And they're usually a little higher quality than this one here. And lastly, all compliant vendors end up listed on the NEMSIS website on that testing status page I mentioned before, that I'm sure all of our vendors on this call are aware of. So for state software, you end up in this table with your software version, the NEMSIS version you tested, and the date you tested. And for field vendors, you end up in this bigger table with sort of the same information. And then at the bottom, here's our people who are in progress. So that is the basic agency testing process in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions about that process before I move on to recertification and changes for 3.5 testing? Awesome. Okay. So for recertification, we don't have a white paper or documentation on the process yet. It's not been 100% formalized. Traditionally, we have not had a large number, really any requests for recertification from vendors. As that's changing, we're going to be developing some more formal documentation, and that should be released in January. Currently, the way that we're doing recertification is it's sort of like maybe an expedited version of regular compliance testing. I send over one set of test cases with instructions to submit to CTA, and then we do hold a quick phone call to ensure that schematron validation and XML validation are still taking place. And then we go through the whole test case submission process to verify that all the elements are represented as expected with the values that were indicated in the test case. Part of the reason that we're doing this phone call to check validation is that that has been a concern for end users, that software, to ensure that software is in fact doing schematron and XML schema validation on export and on import. We've had some complaints recently about XML errors in submissions or schematron errors. So we're trying to be extra careful to ensure that all software is running the necessary validation. So once the software product has been recertified, what we're doing is we're updating the software version and the date certified in the table where they're already listed. Does anyone have any questions about the recertification process? Okay, if anyone has any comments about that, please feel free to shoot me an email, and then expect to see a similarly detailed set of instructions and checklists for recertification sometime around January 1st. So changes for 3.5. There aren't going to be a lot of changes for compliance under 3.5. Obviously, we're going to spin up some new web services to test 3.5 files very shortly. And there will be some testing procedures to support the fact that state data sets are now mandatory for receive and process vendors at the state level. There will be a state data set test case of sorts that you will have to complete and send via web services. An additional change is we're going to start having new clinical test cases developed each year to go along with the recertification process, both for all versions as needed and for 3.5 as required by the TAC. So vendors compliant on 3.5 will need to recertify every 2 years or whenever they have a major version change on their software, whichever occurs first. So we'll have some new test cases coming out every year to accommodate that retesting to ensure that we're not asking the same test questions every time we test, essentially. And that's my last slide. So does anyone have any questions about any part of compliance testing?
Laurel, this is Julianne. Did you talk about appointments that you have available for the fall for those companies that are seeking compliance testing?
Sure. So I know that many vendors are looking to recertify compliance or become compliant for the first time by the end of this year. So I'm going to be out of the country in the second half of December. So I would encourage everyone to schedule their appointments early, and please don't wait until the last minute to try and complete these requirements. Because if there is a problem, I could not guarantee you that we will be able to solve it and help you get your recertification or compliance by January 1st. And if anyone has any questions about that or any questions about any part of the process, you should always feel free to reach out to me. I do not know all the answers all of the time, but we have some great people here and some great resources who can help us with things. I mean, a good example is schematron. Schematron is a pretty difficult and complex topic, but if you have a question about Schematron, please let me know, and I can work with others at the TAC to get you an answer.
If there aren't any other questions, Laurel did a really thorough job with explaining that process. Laurel, Mike is asking, is California requiring recertification this year?
So I can't speak for California, but what I have heard is that everyone compliant in California is fine for now, but as of January 1st, will need to be recertified, and you will continue to need to recertify once per year. For more details on that, I would reach out to their state data managers and the officials in their EMS office.
So Peter is asking, as of January 1st or after January 1st?
Again, I would encourage you to talk to those in California. But what I have heard is on January 1st, they will send me a new Schematron file to deploy for their state, and they will deploy it to their website, their web services as well, that will only allow submissions from vendors listed in the Schematron file for the software versions listed in the Schematron file. Right now, they have this rule in their Schematron file as a warning. They tell me that they're going to upgrade it to an error on January 1st. So I can't speak for whether or not that's actually going to happen or if that still remains their plan, but that was what I was told.
Peter and Mike, does that answer your question?
Just means that I need to reach out to some folks in California and see what's going on.
That sounds like a good plan. Are there any other questions for Laurel while we've got her captivated? So the next public training that's coming up will be in November, and that's November 5th, 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Kevin White is going to be going over Tableau. So if you've got any questions about Tableau dashboards that are offered through NEMSIS, whether it's the information, the process, or utilizing them to their fullest potential, that will be our November training. Any questions before we end the call, or any last thoughts from you, Laurel?
I don't have anything. I'll just reiterate again, if any of you have complaints, questions, or need help, please reach out to me. My goal is to help you all attain compliance. So if there's anything I can do to assist you in that, please let me know.
Okay, so Peter's asking, do we have the, right.
So it's a good question. The website is not yet updated, but all of the 3.5 materials, save a couple of usage guides and white papers, have been updated and committed into the Git repository. So if you're itching to get a look at the data dictionary or the XSDs for 3.5, I would direct you to the Git repository where you can download those latest versions. As soon as I collect the rest of the white papers and usage guides that we're updating today, we will tag the repository, do some sweeping updates to the website to include all that, and you'll be able to find everything in the normal place where you would look for those 3.4 documents. So what it'll look like is you'll see 3.5 with a list of stuff, and then 3.4 with a list of stuff on, for example, the data dictionary page, the Schematron page, etc. So that's where we're at with that. Yeah, there will definitely be a notification to the Google group when the website is updated. That should be either later tonight, early tomorrow.
Thanks for keeping us on our toes, Peter. We appreciate that. All right, with no further questions, we appreciate your time. We appreciate Laurel explaining this process to us better. Please let us know if there are specific topics that you would like addressed in a public training. This will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel if you have other people who need to go through this process for software compliance. Thank you so much for participating today. We really appreciate your time.